Andrew Coleman wasn't just rich. Lots of people are rich, especially in the suburbs of New York. Andrew was dependable rich. He was the kind of successful that didn't just buy himself a nice house in Greenwich, Connecticut. He bought stability for everyone else. For 43 people, to be exact, who claimed some sort of blood relation to him, Andrew was the rock. He was the one who quietly covered little cousin Timmy's dental emergency after Timmy's insurance lapsed. He was the one who made sure Aunt Carol's assisted living was in a decent place when her savings ran out. Andrew had spent his life building a reputation. It wasn't built on flash, it was built on reliability. He was the provider. He was the guy who always picked up the check. And that brings us to the first Saturday after New Year's, a cold, crisp afternoon where the light outside was thin and white, but inside the private dining room at the oak hearth, it was warm and smelled of expensive beef and leftover holiday cheer. The oak hearth was one of those places. Dark wood, heavy silverware, hushed staff. Andrew had rented out the entire maple room, a long space dominated by one massive table set for 43. This wasn't just a dinner, it was the annual post-holiday Coleman family reunion. 43 relatives, cousins, second cousins, aunts, uncles, the whole sprawling mess. They had spent 3 glorious hours catching up, talking over one another, complaining about the weather, and assuring Andrew that yes, his company's stock was doing wonderfully. Andrew sat at the head of the table, his 11-year-old daughter Emily nestled beside him. He was basking in the glow of the collective Coleman contentment. He felt the weight of their gratitude, and frankly, he loved it. It was the payment for all his hard work. He had earned this respect.
The dinner had been magnificent. Prime rib, sea bass, 3 different kinds of potatoes. Now the coffee was poured. The last crumbs of creme brulee were being scraped from the plates, and the room was settling into that sleepy, post-gorging lull. If you're enjoying this story of financial tension and family secrets, hit that like button now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. And stick around until the end. You won't believe what happens to Andrew. The ritual was about to begin. Andrew didn't need to be asked. He was the man in charge. He gave a slight nod to the head waiter, a young man named Michael, who looked slightly overwhelmed by the sheer size of the table. Michael approached tentatively, carrying a leather folio that held the bill. Andrew took the folio. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew the cost of feeding 43 people at the oak hearth. It was astronomical. Easily 5 figures once the wine and the mandatory 20% gratuity for the private room were added. But Andrew never flinched at a number. A number was just a number, provided you had the means to crush it. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his bespoke charcoal suit and pulled out his card. It wasn't gold, it wasn't platinum, it was black, heavy. The kind of card that didn't just signal wealth, it signaled access. He placed it on the table with a soft thud. "Go ahead, Michael," Andrew said, his voice smooth and easy. He was already thinking about shaking hands and collecting his thanks. The night was a success. Michael picked up the card, his hand visibly shaking slightly, maybe from nerves, maybe from the weight of the bill. He took it over to the portable terminal stand near the serving station, swiping and tapping the numbers into the machine.
Andrew turned slightly, catching the eye of his cousin, Paul, who was sitting way down at the far end of the table, near the swinging door to the kitchen. Paul was the opposite of Andrew. He had recently gone through a brutal divorce that had stripped him of his landscaping business and most of his savings. Paul was wearing the jacket that looked about 5 years past its prime, and he hadn't said much all evening. He just watched. Andrew gave Paul a small, reassuring nod. "Don't worry, Paul," the look said. "The family is fine. Andrew's got this." Paul just watched him, his expression unreadable, almost hollow. Then the sound came. It wasn't the satisfying chunk of a successful transaction. It was a high-pitched, insistent, panicked beep, beep, beep. Andrew didn't react immediately. He was busy listening to his sister, who was telling a long, winding story about her new puppy's house training struggles. Michael, the waiter, was staring at the terminal. He frowned, tapped the screen nervously, and looked back at Andrew. "Sir," Michael began,
his voice barely audible over the low hum of conversation. It seems to have timed out. Let me try that again." Andrew waved a dismissive hand. These machines are always faulty, Michael. Happens all the time. Just give it another go." He chuckled once, a short, loud bark of a laugh, intended to signal to the nearby relatives that this was merely a minor inconvenience, a technical hiccup beneath his notice. A few relatives closest to him, his brother Mark and his wife Susan, laughed obligingly. Michael swiped the card again. He typed in the gargantuan amount. He hit process. The room had been loud moments ago, a symphony of 43 voices. But the human ear is remarkably sensitive to silence. It notices when the background noise drops out.
This moment of silence is just the beginning. If you want to see how this story ends, hit that notification bell to be alerted when we post the next episodes. And drop a comment below. Have you ever been in an embarrassing situation in public? The second sound was different from the first. It wasn't a timeout warning. It was a short, sharp, final beep. And then a clear red message flashed across the screen. Declined. Michael's face went white. He looked up at Andrew with wide, terrified eyes, holding the black card like it was a live grenade. The conversation didn't stop immediately, but it began to fray around the edges. Like a long rope unraveling, the voices started to drop out one by one. Aunt Carol stopped mid-sentence about her new knitting project. Cousin Timmy stopped arguing with his wife about the Patriots. The silence that descended on the maple room wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the heavy, suffocating presence of 43 people realizing something was fundamentally wrong. Andrew felt the heat rising in his neck. He didn't move. He kept the smile fixed on his face, but it felt like clay cracking. "Declined?" Andrew asked, his voice still smooth but with a dangerous edge of disbelief. "Nonsense. That's a corporate card. Try the chip reader. Maybe the magnetic strip is worn." He stood up, towering over the table. He needed to assert control, to show everyone that this was the restaurant's incompetence, not his lack of funds. Michael, trembling now, tried the chip reader. He inserted the card. He waited. The machine whirred for an agonizing 5 seconds. Beep, 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 beep. Card declined. Andrew's heart, usually a steady drum of confidence, began to race. This was impossible. This was the Centurion card. It didn't get declined. It was the card for emergencies, for business deals, for everything.
He looked around the room. 43 pairs of eyes were fixed on him. They weren't curious anymore. They were calculating. They were seeing the crack in the facade of the dependable provider. Andrew saw his brother, Mark, nervously adjusting his tie. He saw Susan, Mark's wife, whisper something urgently to the woman next to her. And down at the far end, Paul, the broke cousin, was watching. Paul wasn't nervous or calculating. He looked strangely calm, like he had seen this outcome coming from a mile away. Andrew cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. He needed to speak loudly, confidently. "Look, Michael," Andrew said, leaning slightly toward the waiter. "There must be an automated hold. I made a large transfer this morning. Perhaps the bank flagged it. Let me just call them. This will take 2 minutes." But before Andrew could pull out his phone, a new figure materialized beside Michael. It was the manager, a stern-looking woman in a severe black suit jacket, clipboard clutched to her chest. Her expression was polite, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice cutting through the remaining whispers, "I apologize for the delay. It appears the amount is significant, and the issuing bank is not authorizing the transaction. This is the 3rd attempt." She paused, looking pointedly at the 43 silent relatives. "If you wouldn't mind," she continued, her voice lowering slightly, but still audible to the entire front half of the table, "could you step away from the table for a moment? We need to verify your identity and perhaps contact the bank directly." Step aside. The 2 words echoed in Andrew's mind. They meant, We need to discuss why you can't pay this enormous bill without humiliating you further in front of your family, but only slightly less."
Andrew felt a cold sweat break out on his temples. He could not step aside. If he left the table, he would be admitting defeat, admitting that the problem was real and that the $15,000 bill was currently unpayable. His entire identity, the respect he had carefully cultivated for 30 years, would vanish the moment he walked toward the lobby. "That's quite unnecessary," Andrew said, his voice now tight. He forced a smile at the manager. "I assure you there's no issue. It's a technical error. I have other means of payment right here." He started to reach for his wallet, where his secondary personal cards were kept, the ones he rarely used, the ones that weren't quite so flashy. But before his hand could reach the leather, before he could pull out the backup visa that would solve this whole dreadful situation, a small voice piped up right next to him. It was Emily, his daughter, 11 years old, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She had been quietly watching the whole exchange, oblivious to the high-stakes financial drama, but highly sensitive to her father's rising stress. She looked up at Andrew, her brow furrowed in genuine childish confusion. "Dad?" she asked, her voice clear and carrying perfectly in the sudden, echoing silence. "If we have so much money, why does the bank keep calling you late at night and asking for Mr. Smith?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was pure, simple inquiry. But it hit the room like a thunderclap. Wait, before we continue, if this plot twist caught you off guard, smash that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. You have no idea how deep Andrew's hole goes. The silence that followed was absolute. 43 people froze. The waiter, Michael, stopped breathing. The manager stopped mid-sentence, her clipboard held rigid against her chest.
Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Emily, his eyes wide with a desperate plea for silence. Emily, seeing his distress, instantly regretted speaking, her hand flying to cover her mouth. But the words were out. They hung in the air, heavy with implication. "The bank keeps calling, late at night, asking for someone else. The dependable provider, the man who always paid, the man who was currently being chased by creditors, dodging calls, and perhaps, just perhaps, using his daughter's phone line for cover." No one moved, no one coughed, no one dared to interrupt the horrible, grinding realization that was dawning on them all. The rock was crumbling. Andrew swallowed hard. He could feel every single person in the room analyzing that single question. They weren't looking at the declined card anymore. They were looking past it, into the deep, dark financial hole that Andrew had apparently been trying to hide. He had to fix this, now. He reached into his wallet, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped the leather. He pulled out the backup card, a standard, heavy-duty platinum visa, and slammed it down on the table, pushing it toward the manager. "Here," Andrew managed, his voice a strained whisper. "Use this one. The black card is clearly compromised." The manager, recovering slightly, took the platinum card. She didn't look at Andrew. She looked at Emily, then back at the card. She walked back to the terminal, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were walking across thin ice. The room remained utterly silent. Every eye followed the manager. This was the moment of truth. Either Andrew was merely careless with his primary card, or Emily's question meant he was truly circling the drain. The manager swiped the platinum card. She entered the staggering amount. She hit process. Everyone waited. The sound of the machine processing felt louder than any conversation.
Finally, the machine gave a different sound. A soft, single beep. And on the screen, the word, approved. The tension didn't break. It merely shifted. The bill was paid. The immediate humiliation was over. Andrew Coleman had, technically, delivered. The manager handed the card and the receipt back to Andrew. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I apologize for the inconvenience." Her apology sounded professional, but hollow. Andrew took the slip.
He didn't look at the receipt. He just wanted out. The spell was broken, but the atmosphere was irreparably poisoned. The relatives, who moments ago were laughing and relaxed, now moved with a strange, unnatural speed. "Well," Andrew said, trying to inject some false cheer back into the air. "Glad we got that sorted. Technical issues, always a nuisance." He looked around for a round of supportive nods, but found none. People were already standing up. Coats were collected early. The goodbyes were clipped, efficient, and strangely formal. No one lingered to thank Andrew for the magnificent meal, not genuinely at least. They thanked him as if they were performing a duty, not expressing gratitude. "Thanks, Andrew. Great meal," Mark said, grabbing his wool coat and ushering Susan toward the door. "See you around, Andrew," Aunt Carol muttered, avoiding his gaze. There was a noticeable lack of warmth. The transaction had been completed, but the trust had been irreparably damaged by an 11-year-old girl's innocent question. Andrew stood there, feeling the room empty around him. He watched the stream of 43 relatives flow out, a river of expensive coats and cold shoulders. Only one person remained near the table, moving slowly and deliberately. Paul, the broke cousin.
Paul didn't approach Andrew. He didn't offer sympathy or ask questions. Instead, he started quietly stacking the heavy dining chairs against the wall, helping the staff clear the room. He worked methodically, his face still blank. He was doing manual labor for the restaurant, a gesture that was both helpful to the staff and utterly humiliating to Andrew, who was standing there, the paid receipt still clutched in his hand. Andrew watched Paul stack the 10th chair. "Paul," Andrew finally said, his voice low, "you don't have to do that." Paul stopped stacking and looked at Andrew, that same hollow, unreadable expression on his face. He didn't say anything about the bill, or the bank calls, or the humiliation. "Just helping out," Paul said simply. He returned to stacking the chairs, leaving Andrew standing alone at the head of the long, empty table, the ghost of 43 pairs of judging eyes still watching him. Andrew gathered Emily's coat and helped her into it. She still hadn't spoken since her question. As they walked toward the door, Andrew looked back one last time. Paul was still stacking chairs. Andrew was thanked, yes. The required platitudes were exchanged. But as Andrew and Emily stepped out into the cold January air, Andrew noticed something else. Usually, after these big dinners, several relatives would wait outside, lingering to chat, perhaps to ask for a private word about a small loan or a piece of business advice. They waited for the patriarch. Tonight, no one waited for him at the door. They were all gone. Andrew Coleman, the dependable provider, was standing alone. And he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was running out of time and money. The black card hadn't just been declined. His entire future had been put on hold. Right there, in front of the whole family. And they all knew it now.
The worst part was, Emily's question was only scratching the surface of the truth. Andrew had far bigger problems than an overdue credit card payment. Problems that involved much more than the bank asking for Mr. Smith. Problems that involved a huge, high-stakes investment that had gone completely sideways just before Christmas. He hurried Emily to the car, his mind racing.
He needed to get home, to his office, to the numbers. He needed to figure out how to stop the whole elaborate structure of lies and debt from collapsing entirely. As he drove, Emily finally spoke, her voice small and worried. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Andrew gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He risked a quick glance at his daughter. "No, sweetheart," he lied smoothly, the practiced lie of a man who had been deceiving everyone, including himself, for months. "Just a temporary cash flow issue. We're fine." But they weren't fine, and the cash flow issue was about to become a tidal wave. Andrew had built his empire on quick thinking and calculated risks. But 6 months ago, he had taken a risk that wasn't calculated. It was desperate. He had leveraged nearly everything, the house, the company equity, even some of Emily's college fund savings, into a single investment, a sprawling real estate development deal in Scottsdale, Arizona. He had expected the deal to close by Thanksgiving, bringing him a 400% return and solving all his liquidity problems. Instead, the lead developer had vanished, taking Andrew's $10 million stake, money that wasn't entirely his to begin with, right along with him. Now, Andrew was juggling interest payments, trying to sell off assets quickly and quietly, and dodging calls from the very serious men who had helped him secure the initial massive loan. The black card was declined because the corporate account was nearly empty, and the bank had placed a temporary hold on unusual transactions above $5,000, sensing a coming default.
He drove past the familiar, manicured lawns of his neighborhood in Greenwich. The house looked imposing and solid, a testament to his success. But Andrew knew the truth. The house, too, was mortgaged to the hilt. When they got inside, Emily went straight to the living room to watch a movie. Andrew went straight to his home office. He locked the door behind him. The office was usually a sanctuary, a place of power. Tonight, it felt like a cage. He slumped into his leather chair and pulled his laptop toward him. He needed to check the accounts again. He needed to see if the small parcel of land he had put up for emergency sale in rural upstate New York had generated any interest. He logged into his main corporate banking portal. The screen loaded slowly, agonizingly so. When the balances finally appeared, Andrew felt a sharp stab of panic. The numbers were worse than he had calculated just that morning. The interest payments had devoured the last of his operating capital. He needed $3.5 million within the next 10 days just to cover the immediate debt obligation and stop the bank from calling in the larger loan. If the bank called in the loan, everything went. The house, the company, the reputation. He leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. He needed a miracle. Just then, his cell phone, which he had left charging on the desk, lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID was blocked. Andrew knew who it was. It wasn't the bank. It was much worse. It was the collection agent for the private loan he had secured to cover a hole left by the vanished developer, the man who kept calling and asking for Mr. Smith. Andrew stared at the phone. He couldn't answer. Not yet. He needed a plan. He looked down at his desk, and his eyes fell on a thick, legal-sized envelope that had arrived via courier earlier that day while he was at the reunion. It was marked confidential, immediate attention required.
He hadn't opened it. He had been too focused on the family dinner facade. Andrew tore open the envelope. Inside was a letterhead from the law firm representing the collection agency. The letter was short, brutal, and to the point. It detailed the outstanding loan amount, the failure to meet the recent repayment schedule, and a final demand. Andrew's eyes scanned the page, looking for the deadline. It was 3 days away. Not 10, 3. If the $3.5 million wasn't paid in 72 hours, they would begin immediate proceedings to seize the remaining collateral, which included all the remaining liquid assets of his holding company and, most importantly, his family home. Andrew dropped the letter onto the desk. He felt dizzy. 3 days. He had to raise $3.5 million in 3 days without anyone knowing. If the family found out the true extent of his financial ruin, the humiliation at the oak hearth would seem like a gentle reprimand.
He would lose everything he had spent his life building. He stood up, pacing the office. He had already tried every conventional route. Banks wouldn't lend him more until the Scottsdale situation was resolved. His business partners weren't wealthy enough to float him that kind of cash. There was only one option left, an option he had dismissed as too risky, too desperate, too insane. It was the only asset he had left that was truly liquid and completely hidden from his creditors. The Coleman Family Trust. Andrew wasn't the sole beneficiary, but he was the principal trustee, a position he had held since his father passed away. The trust held approximately $12 million in various bonds and blue-chip stocks, money intended to ensure the long-term financial stability of the entire Coleman clan, including his cousins, aunts, and uncles. The same 43 people who had just watched him sweat over a $15,000 bill. He had always considered the trust sacrosanct. It was the safety net. But now, Andrew needed a safety net of his own.
He could access the trust funds. He could transfer the $3.5 million, cover the debt, buy himself 6 months of breathing room, and then, when his other small investments finally liquidated, he could quietly replace the money. No one would ever know. It was a temporary measure, a loan. He walked over to the heavy safe, hidden behind a painting of his grandfather. He entered the combination, his fingers flying over the dial, a motion he knew by heart. Inside the safe were physical documents, passports, and the key to the trust's online access. He pulled out the small encrypted USB drive that held the access codes. He stared at it, the small metal object feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. If he did this, he would be betraying the one sacred duty his father had entrusted him with. He would be risking the financial security of every single person who had been sitting at that table today. But if he didn't do it, he would lose his home, his company, and his daughter's future college fund anyway. It was a choice between public ruin now or a secret risk for temporary salvation. He plugged the USB drive into his computer. He opened the trust portal. The screen glowed, showing the healthy 7-figure balance, $12,045,678.11. He opened the transfer screen. He entered the destination account, the account belonging to the collection agency, the one demanding $3.5 million. His finger hovered over the transfer button. He thought of Emily's innocent face, her question that had silenced the room. Why does the bank keep calling you late at night? He thought of Paul, stacking the chairs, watching him fall. He took a deep breath. He was Andrew Coleman. He fixed things. He was the provider. This was just a temporary fix to keep the whole world from crashing down. He would replace the money. He had to. He clicked transfer. The screen flashed. Processing.
Andrew leaned back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. The immediate threat was gone. He had bought himself 3 days. Guys, this story is getting heavy. If you're as shocked as I am by Andrew's decision, let me know in the comments. Did he have another choice? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This story is about to get so much worse. He felt a fleeting sense of relief, quickly followed by a crushing wave of guilt. He had just stolen $3.5 million from his family. He had to act quickly now. He needed a plausible cover story for the sudden, brief lack of liquidity that had caused the black car to fail. Something that sounded impressive, high stakes, and temporary. He pulled up a news feed. He needed inspiration. He needed a big, noisy distraction that sounded like the kind of problem a millionaire deals with, not a desperate debtor. He scrolled through financial headlines. Then he saw it. A major tech company, based in California, had just announced a massive, hostile takeover bid for a smaller, struggling competitor. The story was everywhere. Andrew Coleman was a businessman. He could spin this. He picked up his phone and called his brother, Mark,
the one who had looked most uncomfortable at the dinner. Mark was the biggest gossip in the family. "Mark, it's Andrew. Listen, about the dinner today," Andrew started, his voice firm and controlled. "That card issue, it was a nightmare. I'm in the middle of a massive, complicated merger negotiation. Hostile takeover stuff, very delicate. My bank put a temporary freeze on large personal expenditures to prevent any leakage of funds during the final negotiations. Pure paranoia on their part, but standard procedure for a deal this size. I had to use the backup card, obviously." He heard Mark exhale sharply on the other end. "A takeover? Andrew, that sounds huge."
"It is," Andrew confirmed, leaning into the lie. "Absolutely huge. Could triple the company's valuation. But it means I'm completely tied up for the next few months. Very high stakes. I just wanted to clear up the confusion about the card. You know how these things look." "Of course, Andrew, of course," Mark chirped, his tone instantly reverting to respectful awe. "I knew it was something big. I'll tell Susan. We were just worried it was, well, you know." "No need to worry," Andrew said, his confidence returning now that he had the narrative. "Just running a major corporation. Tell everyone I'm fine. Just busy." He hung up the phone. The seed was planted. By tomorrow, the entire family would hear that Andrew Coleman hadn't been suffering a financial collapse. He had been engaged in a secret, high-level corporate war that required temporary financial austerity. He looked at the open trust portal. The transfer was complete. Andrew had survived the evening. He had bought time. But the clock was ticking, and now the stakes were higher than ever. He wasn't just risking his own future, he was risking the future of everyone who trusted him. He had to make this work. He had to replace that money. He closed his laptop, walked out of the office, and went to check on his daughter. Emily was asleep on the couch, the TV humming softly. Andrew covered her with a blanket, kissing her forehead. He went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He kept hearing the sharp, final beep of the declined card, followed by Emily's innocent, devastating question. He was safe for now, but he knew this was just the beginning of the real crisis. The lie he had just told Mark and the betrayal he had just committed against the family trust were merely the foundations of the next, much bigger gamble.
He was a millionaire who couldn't pay a dinner bill. And now he was a thief trying to save his reputation. The pressure was immense, and he hadn't even begun to deal with the fallout from the Scottsdale disaster itself. The men who had lent him the initial $10 million were not known for their patience, even with a temporary payment. Andrew knew he couldn't just sit and wait for his small asset sales to clear. He needed a bold, immediate move to generate liquidity and replace the trust funds before the family's annual audit in 6 months. He needed to find a way to turn the Scottsdale mess into a profit, or at least cut his losses dramatically. There was one man who might know how to salvage the unsalvageable, a man who dealt in the shadows of high finance and specialized in cleaning up other people's catastrophic mistakes. A man named Victor Sterling. Andrew had always avoided him, sensing the danger. But now, he had no choice. Andrew reached for his phone again, pulling up an old encrypted contact list he hadn't touched in years. He scrolled down until he found the name, V. Sterling. This was the call he had been dreading. This was the point of no return. He had to make a deal with the devil if he wanted to keep his life. He hit the call button, listening to the phone ring 3 times before a smooth, low voice answered on the other end. "Sterling," the voice stated. No greetings, no warmth. "Victor, it's Andrew Coleman," Andrew whispered into the phone, his voice thick with desperation. "I need your help. I have a situation in Scottsdale. It's complicated, and I need it fixed yesterday." Victor Sterling paused for a long moment. Andrew could hear the faint click of a lighter on the other end. "Andrew Coleman," Sterling finally drawled, amusement coloring his tone. "I've heard things are tight. You're the last man I expected to call. Complicated, you say.
Tell me, Andrew, how deep are you in?
Andrew took a ragged breath, deep enough that I just paid a $15,000 dinner bill with a backup card, and my daughter asked why the bank keeps calling me at night. Sterling chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. That is a complication, Andrew, but you called the right man. Tell me everything, and be warned, my fee for cleaning up messes like yours is substantial. You'll be paying in more than just money. Andrew knew it, but what choice did he have? He started talking, detailing the vanished developer, the leveraged assets, the 3-day deadline, and the desperate transfer from the family trust. He left nothing out. When Andrew finally finished, the line was silent. A family trust, Andrew? Sterling asked, the amusement gone, replaced by a cold, sharp disapproval. That's low, even for a desperate man. I needed time, Andrew pleaded. Time is expensive, Andrew. Here is what we will do. I will send my team to Scottsdale immediately. They will find your developer, or what's left of him, and they will retrieve your collateral. But you owe me. Starting now, you will do exactly as I say. No questions. Anything, Andrew promised. Good. First, you need to create a distraction, a big one. Something that makes the family forget the declined card and the late-night calls. Something that makes them look at you with envy again, not pity. You need to remind them who Andrew Coleman is. I've already started the rumor about a massive hostile takeover, Andrew admitted. Sterling scoffed. Amateur hour, Andrew. We need more than rumors. We need action. I have a small, distressed asset in the Midwest, a failing manufacturing plant. I need you to acquire it publicly, right now, using your remaining corporate shell. It's cheap, but it's loud. It will make the news. It will solidify your takeover story. But I can't afford a new asset, Victor. I just emptied my accounts.
You don't understand, Andrew, Sterling said patiently. You are acquiring it for me. You are putting your name on the paperwork. I will supply the funds for the purchase. It will be a smokescreen. And that, Andrew, is the first payment of your debt to me. Andrew hesitated. This was moving too fast, too deep into the murky waters he had always avoided. But the alternative was ruin. Consider it done, Victor, Andrew said, the words tasting like ash. Send the papers. Excellent, Sterling replied, and the line went dead. No pleasantries, no advice, just a command followed by silence. Andrew stared at the phone, the metallic taste of fear and adrenaline sharp in his mouth. He had just traded his financial freedom for a partnership with a ghost. But the $3.5 million transfer to the collection agency was already clearing. The immediate threat of ruin and exposure was gone. He had bought time, and now he had a plan, however terrible.
Andrew followed instructions perfectly. He signed documents transferring ownership using the last liquid assets of his holding company, which Sterling immediately replenished, making the transaction look legitimate on the books. He leaked carefully constructed quotes to the Wall Street Journal about aggressive expansion and leveraging distressed assets in a volatile market. The result was immediate and spectacular. By Tuesday afternoon, Andrew Coleman's face was splashed across the business news. The headlines didn't focus on the declining value of his company. They focused on his aggressive, out-of-nowhere acquisition of Midwest Metals. Coleman Holdings makes aggressive Midwest play. Hostile takeover confirmed. Greenwich mogul snaps up Ohio manufacturer in surprise deal. This was exactly the smokescreen Andrew needed. This was the narrative that explained the declined card. Of course the bank was nervous. Andrew was engaged in a massive high-stakes financial war. On Wednesday morning, Andrew forced himself to leave the office and attend a charity breakfast he usually skipped. He needed to be seen. He needed to collect the dividends of his lie. He walked into the mahogany-paneled dining room of the Greenwich Country Club, and the atmosphere was electric. People didn't just nod, they rushed him. They didn't offer polite greetings, they demanded details. "Andrew, you sly dog," boomed Richard Vance, a rival developer who usually treated Andrew with cool indifference. "Midwest Metals, massive move. I heard you outmaneuvered 3 major investment groups for that deal. Is it true you put the entire corporate account on ice during the negotiations?"
Andrew smiled, a wide, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Richard, you know how it is. High-stakes chess. You can't leave anything exposed when you're closing a deal of that magnitude." Total freeze. The bank was nervous about a 5-figure charge, can you believe it? Had to use my personal platinum. Richard laughed, a hearty, booming sound. A 5-figure dinner bill is pocket change. But the optics, Andrew, the optics. Brilliant strategy. Playing the small game to win the big one. Andrew spent the entire breakfast soaking up the awe. The narrative had flipped completely. He wasn't the man who couldn't pay. He was the master strategist who chose not to pay with the black card as part of a genius maneuver. His reputation wasn't just restored, it was elevated. Later that afternoon, his brother Mark called, practically breathless. "Andrew, I told you. I knew it was huge. Aunt Carol called me. She heard it on the local news. Everyone is talking about the Ohio plant. They all think you're a genius. Even Paul called me." Andrew paused. "Paul? What did Paul say?" "Oh, you know Paul. He just asked if the plant was profitable. I told him, 'Paul, Andrew Coleman doesn't buy things that aren't profitable. It's all part of the hostile takeover.'" Mark chuckled, pleased with his own interpretation. Andrew hung up, the feeling of triumph mixed with a sickening realization of how easily people believed what they wanted to believe. He had bought their respect with a massive, dangerous lie, financed by stolen family money and executed by a man he feared. Meanwhile, Victor Sterling's team was working in Scottsdale. Andrew was desperate for an update on the $10 million that had vanished. That money was the key to replacing the family trust funds. The call finally came just before midnight, 2 days after Andrew had agreed to the deal. It was Lena, Sterling's liaison.
"The situation is contained, Mr. Coleman," Lena said, her voice emotionless. "The developer was located in Tijuana. He was uncooperative." Andrew felt a cold dread. Uncooperative. Did you get the money back? "The money is gone, Andrew. Spent. But the developer was holding a significant asset, the core land parcels for the development. We've secured those. They are now legally under a new holding company, registered in the Cayman Islands. They are safe." "Safe, but not liquid," Andrew muttered, rubbing his temples. The land parcels were valuable, perhaps even worth more than his initial investment, but selling them quickly would require a massive discount, and the title issues were a mess. "We are working on liquidation," Lena assured him. "But this required significant resources, Andrew. Legal fees, extraction costs. The initial $3.5 million payment you made was crucial to stop the immediate threat, but now the retrieval cost is due."
Andrew leaned forward, his heart sinking. How much, Lena? Victor has decided that the cost of securing the Scottsdale assets, plus the capital required to run the Midwest Metals plant, which is now your responsibility, legally speaking, totals $4 million. This is due immediately. $4 million? I don't have $4 million. I just used the last of my liquid funds to cover the debt. That's why I called Victor, Andrew hissed, keeping his voice low so Emily, sleeping upstairs, wouldn't hear. You have the family trust, Andrew, Lena stated simply. Victor is aware of the balance. He suggests a temporary collateralized loan against the trust funds. We will structure it as an investment, clean on paper. You will transfer the $4 million to our offshore account immediately. This covers our fees and provides initial operating capital for the Ohio plant.
Andrew felt dizzy. This wasn't buying time, this was digging a deeper hole. He had just stolen $3.5 million, and now he was being forced to steal another $4 million. He would have drained over half the family's entire safety net. No, Alina, I can't, Andrew whispered, the word tasting like defeat. I can't risk the entire trust. The family audit is in 6 months. I have to replace the first transfer. Then you had better liquidate those Scottsdale assets very quickly, Lena countered, her voice hardening. Because if you do not transfer the $4 million by tomorrow morning, Victor will consider the agreement breached. And if the agreement is breached, Andrew, we stop protecting you. We release the information about the trust transfer to the media, and we allow your creditors to seize your home. You will be ruined, Andrew, completely, and you will be facing charges. The threat was clear. Sterling wasn't a partner. He was a blackmailer. Andrew had walked straight into a trap. He looked back at the painting hiding the safe. He knew the combination by heart. The trust balance was still over $8 million after the first transfer. He had to do it. He had no choice. Send the transfer details. Andrew choked out. The second transfer was executed in the cold hours before dawn. $4 million vanished from the Coleman Family Trust, leaving a balance of just over $4.5 million. The entire financial future of 43 people, including Emily, now rested on Andrew's ability to sell murky land parcels in Arizona for a massive profit, fast. He felt physically sick. He was a thief, now $7.5 million deep into stolen family money. He didn't sleep. He waited for Victor Sterling's next move. It came later that morning, not through Lena, but directly from Sterling himself.
Andrew? Sterling's voice was smooth, almost friendly, which Andrew knew was far more dangerous than Lena's cold formality. The funds are appreciated. You are now fully covered on the Scottsdale cleanup. You have 6 months to liquidate those assets and replace the trust money. I suggest you get moving. And the Midwest Metals plant? Andrew asked, trying to sound professional, not terrified. Ah, the plant. Your new, very public distraction. It has a slight issue, Andrew. A regulatory entanglement with the EPA regarding certain waste disposal procedures from 20 years ago. Standard environmental cleanup stuff, but it's holding up a massive federal contract I need that plant to fulfill. Andrew frowned. I didn't see that liability in the papers. Of course you didn't, Andrew. That's why I hired you. You are the dependable provider, the respectable Greenwich millionaire. You have connections in Washington, Andrew. Old college friends, senators, regulatory board members. You need to make a few calls. You need to ensure that the EPA issue is resolved quietly, quickly, and permanently. Andrew's blood ran cold. This wasn't just illegal. It was career suicide if it ever came out. He would be using his political connections, connections built on years of legitimate lobbying and campaign donations, to cover up a major environmental crime. Victor, I can't do that, Andrew said, finding a sliver of defiance. That is active obstruction. If I get caught, I lose everything. My freedom, my company, everything. Andrew, Sterling sighed, the sound echoing the patience of a predator instructing its prey.
You already lost everything when you leveraged your daughter's college fund into a deal with a runaway developer. You just stole $7.5 million from your relatives. You are past the point of worrying about minor regulatory infractions.
Sterling's voice dropped, becoming razor sharp. You are my asset now, Andrew. You have a very specific set of skills, respectability. I need you to lean on those contacts. I need the EPA issue gone by the end of the week. Do this, and I continue to shield you. Fail, and I release the paperwork detailing the trust transactions to the New York Times. You will be in prison before the week is out. Andrew knew he was beaten. He was being forced to use his carefully cultivated respectability as a weapon for Sterling's dirty work. If you're following this downward spiral and want to see how Andrew tries to get out of this, share this video right now and leave a comment telling me how far you think this will go, and subscribe to the channel for the continuation of this insane story. Tell me what specific contacts you need me to lean on, Andrew conceded, his voice defeated. Sterling gave him the names: a mid-level EPA director who owed Andrew a favor from a past campaign fundraiser, and a powerful senator who was an old fraternity brother. Andrew spent the next 2 days in a panic, navigating the treacherous waters of political influence. He used every ounce of charm and every shred of favor he possessed. He didn't ask the EPA director to break the law. He asked him to prioritize a reassessment of the old environmental impact study, claiming the new ownership, Andrew Coleman, was committed to a massive, immediate cleanup, a cleanup Sterling had no intention of funding. It was classic corruption, using the appearance of legitimacy to subvert the process. By Friday afternoon, Andrew had confirmation. The EPA director, under pressure from the senator, agreed to fast-track the review. The regulatory obstacle was temporarily shelved, allowing Midwest Metals to pursue the lucrative federal contract. Andrew called Sterling with the news.
"See, Andrew," Sterling said, sounding genuinely pleased. "You are an effective operator. You just had to realize that your reputation is more useful as leverage than as a shield." "What's next?" Andrew asked, his tone flat. He knew there would always be a next. "Next, you focus on Scottsdale. I need those assets liquidated quickly. And Andrew, keep up the act. Hostile takeover, high-stakes finance. You are the man who can afford to buy dinner for 43 people, twice over. Don't let your brother Mark forget it." Andrew hung up. He was now a willing participant in a criminal enterprise.
He found Paul's number. He dialed it, feeling another wave of revulsion. He was asking the man he had silently pitied for years to save him. Paul answered on the first ring. "Andrew, what's up? Mark said you bought some enormous factory in Ohio." "That's right, Paul. High-stakes stuff," Andrew said, forcing the confident veneer. "Listen, I need your expertise. I have a small, very private land liquidation project. Nothing to do with the Ohio deal. It's a quick, quiet sale in Arizona. I need someone to manage the logistics, the local brokers, the paperwork. Discreetly. No one can know this is my property." Paul was quiet for a moment. He could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background. "Arizona," Paul finally said. "That's a long way from Connecticut, Andrew. And I'm not exactly in the business of high-finance real estate anymore." "I know, Paul, but I need someone I can trust completely. Someone who knows the soil, knows the market value, but isn't tied into my corporate life. I can pay you well, very well, enough to get you back on your feet." Andrew threw out a number, a massive commission that would have been Paul's salary for 2 years. Paul whistled softly. "That's a lot of money, Andrew. What's the catch?" "No catch," Andrew lied. "Just speed. I need this land moved in 30 days, absolute maximum. Can you do it?" Paul paused again. He could sense the internal conflict, the shame of accepting a handout from the man who had always been the golden boy versus the desperation of a man who needed to rebuild his life. 30 days is tight for Arizona land," Paul said slowly, "but I have connections, local guys who move fast. If you're serious about the commission, I'll take it. I need the work." "Excellent. You start Monday. I'll have Lena forward you the details. She's my new acquisition manager."
Andrew tried to sound like he was doing Paul a favor, not saving his own skin.
Understood, Paul said. But Andrew, one thing. I need to know why the big shark is selling land secretly in Arizona while buying factories in Ohio. Doesn't make sense. Andrew almost laughed. Paul, the broke cousin, was the only one who saw the contradiction. It's a leveraged trade, Paul, Andrew said, using business jargon to obscure the truth. I'm shedding low-yield assets to finance the high-yield acquisition. Standard corporate cleanup. Just needs to be fast and quiet. Right, Paul said, his tone still slightly unconvinced. Fast and quiet. I'll be in touch Monday. Andrew hung up, feeling a fleeting relief. He had outsourced his biggest problem to the family member least likely to talk. But as he sat there, staring at the empty wine glass on his desk, Andrew realized he had done the one thing he swore he wouldn't do. He had dragged Paul into his mess. He had turned the broke cousin into a pawn in a desperate game of fraud, blackmail, and stolen family money. He was now running on 3 parallel, high-risk tracks. 1. Maintaining the facade of the hostile takeover mogul for the family and the public. 2. Servicing Victor Sterling's demands, the EPA cover-up, and the subsequent inevitable favors. 3. Secretly liquidating the Scottsdale assets through Paul to replace the $7.5 million in the trust before the 6-month audit. Any one of these tracks derailing would mean catastrophic ruin. Andrew was now fully committed to a life of deception. He had traded his integrity for survival. The next morning, Andrew took Emily out for pancakes at a local diner, a small attempt to reconnect after the traumatic reunion dinner. Emily was still quiet, occasionally glancing at him with a worried look. "Dad," she said, carefully folding her napkin. "Is Mr. Smith still calling?" Andrew froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. He hadn't heard the phone ring late at night since the transfer.
"No, sweetheart," Andrew said gently. "Mr. Smith won't be calling anymore. That was just a temporary confusion at the bank, remember? They've mixed up some accounts." Emily nodded slowly, but her eyes were still skeptical. "And the black card? Why didn't it work?" Andrew delivered the polished lie, the one he had perfected for the financial reporters. "That was part of the plan, Em. I was making a huge deal, bigger than anything I've ever done. The bank got worried about my corporate money, so they locked down my card temporarily. It was a test of how much I really wanted that Ohio factory." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "You bought a factory?" "I bought a factory," Andrew confirmed, puffing up his chest slightly. "It's a very big deal. It means we're safer and stronger than ever." Emily seemed satisfied with his answer. It was a simple narrative of strength and success, one she understood. "Okay," she said, finally smiling. "Good. Because I don't like when you have to whisper on the phone." Andrew smiled back, but his stomach churned. The lie was working on his daughter, just as it was working on the family, but the relief was fleeting. He looked at the newspaper tucked under his arm. The headline read, "Coleman Holdings, New Midwest Acquisition Signals Aggressive Growth Strategy." He was a hero again, but the cost of that heroism was mounting daily, and Victor Sterling hadn't even started to collect his real debt. Later that week, Andrew received a package from Sterling. It was a thick file, marked Midwest Metals Operational Dossier. Andrew opened it, expecting environmental reports or financial projections. Instead, he found schematics for specialized machinery, labeled with technical jargon he didn't understand. Attached was a brief handwritten note from Sterling.
Andrew, now that you own the plant and have cleared the regulatory issues, you need to ensure the facility is ready for its new production line. We are shifting from manufacturing metal parts to specialized components. Your job is to oversee the refitting. Do not ask what the components are. Just ensure the factory is ready for the new machinery arriving next month. I need you on the ground in Youngstown, Ohio by the end of next week. Publicly, this is you taking the reins of your new acquisition. Privately, this is your next task. Andrew felt a cold terror.
He was being pulled off the East Coast, away from his home, his office, and his ability to monitor the delicate situation with Paul in the Scottsdale land. And he was being asked to oversee the refitting of a factory for specialized components that Sterling explicitly told him not to ask about. This wasn't corporate cleanup. This was being drafted into a dangerous operation. He called Lena immediately. "I can't go to Ohio, Lena. I have crucial liquidation deals to manage here. I have to replace the trust funds," Andrew argued desperately. "Victor is quite clear, Andrew," Lena replied, her voice unwavering. "The liquidation can be managed remotely or by your cousin. The Ohio plant is a priority. It is essential for Victor's long-term business. Your physical presence is required to ensure no local interference. You are the owner. You must act like the owner. You leave next Friday." Andrew hung up the phone, defeated. Sterling was intentionally isolating him, cutting him off from his support system, and forcing him deeper into the operation. He had to tell Emily he was leaving. He had to tell his family he was relocating temporarily to the Midwest to personally oversee the integration of the massive new acquisition. The lie was about to become an inconvenient truth.
He looked at the schematic of the Midwest Metals plant. He was no manufacturer. He was a financier. But now he was Victor Sterling's man on the ground, preparing a failing factory for a secret purpose. Andrew knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was walking into a situation far more dangerous than a declined credit card. He was trading his comfortable, respectable life for a role in organized crime, and there was no backup card for this kind of debt. He started packing a small suitcase. He was leaving Greenwich, the heart of his empire, to become a foreman for a criminal operation in Youngstown, Ohio. The dependable provider was about to become the disposable operative, and he had 6 months, maybe less, to replace $7.5 million before his entire family learned the devastating truth. He just hoped Paul was as discreet and efficient as he needed him to be, because Andrew Coleman's fate now rested entirely on the broke cousin he had always looked down upon. Andrew Coleman was flying commercial for the first time in years. No private jet, no first-class suite, just a cramped window seat on a regional carrier bound for Youngstown, Ohio. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was traveling to take command of a major corporate acquisition, but he felt less like a CEO and more like an exile. He arrived in Youngstown to find a city that looked like it had been waiting for a boom that never came. Midwest Metals was a sprawling, gray complex surrounded by chain-link fence, a monument to rust and decline. Lena, Sterling's liaison, met him at the gate, driving a black, unmarked SUV. She wasn't carrying a clipboard this time. She was carrying a very serious-looking firearm holstered beneath her heavy coat.
"Welcome to the front lines, Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice dry. "Your cover story is that you are personally overseeing a massive multi-million-dollar modernization effort. Your real job is to ensure these schematics," she tapped a folder on the dashboard, "are followed exactly. No deviation, no questions." Andrew spent the next week immersed in the reality of his new life. He was the nominal owner, but every decision, every order was filtered through Lena and her silent team of foremen who looked suspiciously like ex-military contractors. The specialized components quickly revealed themselves to be highly complex, custom-machined parts designed to fit into large industrial equipment. Andrew, despite his lack of manufacturing experience, quickly pieced together the truth. These weren't parts for tractors or car engines. These were components designed to bypass security measures, parts for illegal surveillance technology, maybe even black market military hardware. Andrew was running a front for a criminal operation. He was laundering Sterling's reputation and providing him with deniability. The $7.5 million he had stolen from his family was now the price of his silence and cooperation. He tried to keep his head down, focusing on the only thing that mattered, the liquidation of the Scottsdale land. He called Paul every night, the signal often weak in the echoing silence of the abandoned plant office. "How are we looking, Paul?" Andrew would whisper into the phone, anxiety eating at him.
Paul in Arizona sounded calm, detached, and increasingly competent. The land is tricky, Andrew. Lots of title issues, just like you said. But I found a buyer, a consortium out of Phoenix that specializes in drought-resistant farming development. They need the contiguous parcels. They're willing to pay a premium if we can close fast. A premium? How fast? Andrew pressed.
30 days, maybe less. But they are demanding full disclosure on the ownership structure. They want to know why the land is being moved through 3 shell corporations so quickly. And Andrew, Paul's voice dropped, they are asking why your name isn't on any of the initial documents, only some holding company in the Caymans. The pressure was immense. Andrew knew Sterling's lawyers had structured the deal to hide his involvement, but Paul's buyer was digging deep. If Paul revealed Andrew's connection, or worse, Sterling's control, the deal would collapse, and Andrew would be stuck in Ohio with no way to replace the trust money. "Paul, you need to handle it," Andrew instructed, his voice tight. "Tell them it's part of the massive restructuring for the Ohio acquisition. Tell them I'm shedding non-core assets. Use my name, but only for reassurance. Do not, under any circumstances, mention the previous owner or the initial investment." "I understand, Andrew," Paul said, his tone still neutral. "The buyer is firm on the price, though. If I can pull this off, the commission you promised will be mine. But I need to know the entire story, Andrew, not the corporate fluff you gave Mark. Why are you selling $10 million worth of land in secret to buy a rust bucket factory in Ohio? It doesn't add up." Andrew panicked. He couldn't tell Paul about Sterling or the trust. "Paul, I don't have time for your amateur analysis," Andrew snapped, the stress finally breaking his composure. "Just close the deal. You get the money when the funds clear the escrow account. That's all you need to know." There was a long silence on the line. "Okay, Andrew," Paul finally said, his voice cold. "I'll close the deal, but if I find anything dirty, anything that puts me at legal risk, I walk, and I talk." The threat was clear. Paul was no longer the broke cousin looking for scraps. He was a man protecting his own fragile comeback.
Andrew hung up, his hands shaking. He was surrounded by criminals in Ohio, and the one honest man he needed to trust was now holding a gun to his head. The next few days were excruciating. Andrew managed the refitting, watching the specialized machinery roll in under cover of darkness. He saw enough to confirm his worst fears. This was a high-tech smuggling and manufacturing hub designed to operate completely off-grid under the cover of a legitimate corporation. Meanwhile, Paul worked miracles in Arizona. He leveraged his down-to-earth persona and his knowledge of local real estate law to reassure the Phoenix consortium. He managed to move the massive land parcels quickly, avoiding the deep discounts usually associated with a distress sale. 28 days after the disastrous family reunion, Andrew received the final encrypted message from Paul. "Deal is closed. Funds are secured. Wire transfer is initiated. We made a clean $9.2 million after fees. I'm wiring $8 million back to the holding company account now. It should cover the trust hole and then some." Andrew sagged in relief against the cold cinder block wall of the Prant office. $8 million. Enough to replace the $7.5 million he had stolen and a small buffer. He was saved. He could put the money back, close the hole, and face the audit clean. He immediately called Paul, excitement and gratitude bubbling up, almost choking him. "Paul, you did it. You're a miracle worker. I'm wiring your commission right now. Double it. You earned it." "Hold on, Andrew," Paul interrupted, his voice flat. "The money is wired, yes, but I didn't send it to your holding company. I send it to the family trust account." Andrew froze. "What? Paul, why did you do that? That money was supposed to go to the corporate account first. It needs to be laundered through the business to look legitimate."
"Laundered?" Paul scoffed. "Andrew, I looked up the trust account details after you gave me the access codes for the escrow. I saw the massive transfers you made, the $3.5 million and then the $4 million, all in quick succession, all within days of the dinner where your card failed. I saw the whole, Andrew, and I saw that the transfers went to accounts labeled debt resolution and acquisition capital. You didn't just have a cash flow issue, did you?" Andrew felt the air rush out of his lungs. He was caught. Not by Sterling, not by the bank, but by the quiet cousin he had underestimated. Paul, listen to me. You don't understand the complexity. I understand enough, Paul cut in, his voice rising with controlled fury. I understand that you risked the college funds and the retirement savings of 43 people, including your own daughter, to cover a massive secret screw-up, and you made me your bagman for the cleanup. You used me, Andrew, just like you've used everyone else in the family for the last 30 years to make yourself feel like the dependable provider. Andrew couldn't speak. The sheer humiliation of being judged and exposed by Paul was worse than the terror of Sterling. I put the money back, Paul continued. The $7.5 million is back in the trust, plus a small return from the liquidation. The trust is whole again. I secured the family's money, Andrew, not you. I did the right thing. Paul, you've put me in danger, Andrew pleaded. Sterling is tracking those funds. If he sees the money land directly in the trust, he'll know I'm trying to cut him out. He'll ruin me. Maybe, Paul said calmly. But you were already ruined, Andrew. You just hadn't fallen yet. I kept enough back to cover my commission, plus a little extra for hazard pay. It's sitting in a clean account. I'm done with the Arizona land, and I'm done with you.
Wait, Andrew yelled. If you wire my commission now, Sterling will see the sudden outflow from the trust. He'll track it. You need to hold it, Paul. Too late, Andrew. I already wired it to my new business account, and I'm using it to start my own land development company in Arizona. Clean slate. No more charity from you. Goodbye, Andrew. The line went dead. Andrew stared at the silent phone. The money was back in the trust. The family was safe, but he was completely exposed to Victor Sterling. What a twist! Paul just turned the tables. If you're rooting for Paul or Andrew, comment below. And take a second to drop a like and subscribe. The ending of this story will leave you speechless. He was right. Sterling was tracking everything. Within minutes, Lena burst into the office, her face grim. The trust account, Andrew, the $7.5 million. Why did it suddenly receive a massive deposit from an offshore holding company that was supposed to be paying us? Andrew swallowed hard. He had to think fast. He couldn't implicate Paul. It was a defensive maneuver, Lena, Andrew lied, pulling out the last card he had, the corporate bluff. I realized the Scottsdale liquidation was too clean. I needed to move the cash out of the holding company immediately before the bank froze the account due to the suspicious activity. I put it into the trust. It's the cleanest, most protected asset I have. It's temporary collateral. I'm moving it back to the corporate account next week. Lena stared at him, her eyes narrowed. She didn't believe him, but she couldn't definitively prove the lie either. Victor wants a word, she said, handing him a satellite phone. Andrew took the phone, his hands slick with sweat. Andrew, Sterling's voice was low, devoid of anger, which made it terrifying. You are playing games with my money. The trust is not your personal safe deposit box. You committed those funds to my operation. Victor, I secured your collateral, Andrew countered, trying to sound firm. The trust is the only place strong enough to hold that much liquid cash right now without the bank flagging it. It's safe. I am moving it back to the corporate account next week, as soon as the paperwork clears. Sterling was silent for an agonizing moment. Perhaps, but this shows a lack of trust, Andrew, and I demand payment for the inconvenience. The Midwest Metals plant is now set up for production. I need you to stay on site for the next 2 months. You will personally oversee the transfer of the first shipment of specialized components. And Andrew, if you try to leave, or if you talk to anyone who might disrupt my operation, the entire Coleman family will learn precisely how you restored their trust fund. Andrew was trapped. He was now a high-level prisoner, forced to actively participate in Sterling's criminal enterprise, all because he needed to maintain the facade of the respectable provider. He spent the next 2 months in Youngstown, a ghost in a decaying industrial town, overseeing the movement of boxes he knew contained instruments of chaos. He was miserable, isolated, and terrified. The only bright spot was the knowledge that Emily and the family were financially safe. The lie was still holding.
Mark called him weekly, raving about the visionary work Andrew was doing in Ohio, comparing him to industrial giants of the past. Then, the inevitable collapse came, not from Sterling, but from the authority Sterling had tried to manipulate. Andrew had successfully delayed the EPA, but he hadn't eliminated the problem. The senator he had leaned on was suddenly facing an ethics investigation for unrelated issues. The EPA director, sensing the political winds changing, decided to cover himself. 3 days before the first major shipment of specialized components was due to leave Midwest Metals, the plant was swarmed by federal agents, EPA, FBI, and Homeland Security.
Andrew, standing on the factory floor, watched the entire operation grind to a halt. Lena and her contractors vanished into the chaos, leaving Andrew standing alone, the sole legitimate owner of a massive, illegal operation. Andrew was immediately detained. The headlines were instantaneous and brutal. Greenwich mogul Andrew Coleman arrested in Ohio. Midwest Metals acquisition a front for illegal manufacturing. FBI seizes assets of Coleman Holdings. Environmental fraud and export violations suspected. The fall was swift and complete. Andrew Coleman, the dependable provider, was exposed as a desperate criminal. He was held for questioning for 3 days. He refused to implicate Paul or the family trust, knowing he had to protect the money. He kept his silence about Victor Sterling, knowing that talking would put Emily in direct danger. He took the fall for the entire operation, using the last shred of his corporate persona to appear as an arrogant, reckless CEO who had simply cut too many corners. His legal team, the ones he still had access to, worked frantically. The charges were severe, but Andrew had one saving grace. The family trust was clean. The public scandal was devastating. His wife immediately filed for divorce. His company, Coleman Holdings, was seized and liquidated to cover the massive fines and liabilities associated with the Ohio plant. The Greenwich house was sold. Everything Andrew had built based on reputation was gone. But the family trust, thanks to Paul's quick, unauthorized action, remained untouched. The family reunion that year was subdued, held not at the Oak Hearth, but at Mark's modest home in suburban New Jersey. Andrew, out on bail and facing years of legal battles, didn't attend. He was living in a small rented apartment, stripped of his wealth, his status, and his power. 2 weeks before the annual trust audit, Andrew received a visitor. It wasn't a lawyer or a reporter. It was Paul.
Paul sat across from Andrew in the tiny apartment, looking sharp, tanned, and successful. He had closed several major deals in Arizona and was clearly thriving. "I came to see how you were holding up," Paul said, his voice quiet. "I lost everything, Paul," Andrew admitted, looking down at his hands. "Everything but the trust." "I know," Paul said simply. "I checked the audit reports. The trust is solid. You're lucky the feds couldn't connect you to the money once I moved it out of that shell company." We're getting to the conclusion of this incredible story. If you've watched this far, you deserve an award. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment what you learned from Andrew's story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. "You saved them, Paul," Andrew said, looking up, genuine gratitude in his eyes. "You saved Emily." Paul nodded. "I didn't do it for you, Andrew. I did it for the family, and I did it for Emily. She deserves better than to have her future decided by your ego." Paul reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was Andrew's black Centurion card, the one the bank had failed to retrieve when his corporate accounts were frozen. Paul had found it among the scattered paperwork from the Scottsdale deal. "I think you should hold on to this," Paul said, placing the black card on the worn kitchen table. "A reminder of what happens when you prioritize the symbol over the substance." Andrew picked up the card. It felt cold and meaningless now. "I need to ask you something, Andrew," Paul said, leaning forward. "Why? Why did you risk everything? Why steal from the family?" Andrew looked at the black card, then at Paul. He saw not the broke cousin, but a man who had faced ruin honestly and rebuilt his life with integrity.
"Because I was terrified," Andrew admitted, the lie finally breaking completely.
I wasn't just afraid of losing the money, Paul. I was afraid of losing the respect. I was afraid of being you. I spent my whole life being the rock, the provider. When the money vanished, I realized my entire identity was a balance sheet. I couldn't face 43 relatives knowing I was nothing. Paul listened, his expression softening slightly. I know that fear, Andrew. I lived it at that dinner. But I learned something when I lost everything. You find out who you really are when the money runs out. Paul stood up. The family is fine, Andrew. The trust will keep them afloat. And you'll survive this. You're smart. You just need to learn how to build something real, not just something flashy. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Andrew, I know you were grateful for the dinner that night, but maybe next time, just split the check. Paul left, closing the door softly behind him. Andrew sat alone in his tiny apartment, the black card heavy in his hand. He was ruined, disgraced, and facing a long legal battle. But the family was safe, and the crushing pressure of the lie was finally gone. He looked at the black card one last time, then tossed it into the trash can. Andrew Coleman, the millionaire who couldn't pay for dinner, had finally paid the true cost of his reputation. He was starting over, with nothing but his daughter and the faint, cold hope that maybe, just maybe, he could learn how to be dependable without being rich. The silence in the room, caused by Emily's innocent question, had saved the family, but it had utterly destroyed the man who thought he had everything. And Andrew knew, standing there in the cold silence of his new life, that the story was far from over. But for the first time in years, the lies were.
So, what did you think of Andrew Coleman's story? Comment below with your opinion. Did he deserve what happened, or do you feel sorry for him? If you enjoyed this, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories. And share this video. Everyone needs to hear about the consequences of living a lie. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.